意識が怖い。あの人に勝てる気がしない。
飲まれるな。俺たちは負けない。今ので分かったことは、よし、これでチェックメイトだ。捨て身か、愚かな。フェイクか。
Hello, welcome back once again to Yellow Card TCG. That's right, it is finally time for a long-awaited Set 4 Avantgarda deck profile. I've been excited about this deck since forever. This is one of my favourite standard decks, and I've been very much looking forward to the new cards to update it with. Now, of course, the deck is nowhere near as strong in the meta as it was on release. I definitely wouldn't play it into the likes of Malworm or the new Leverdress, but it is still very playable, it is still fun, and especially the new pieces all coming together, there's a lot of synergies involved, which I'm really excited to show off today. So I'm not going to spend too long talking about the deck. I'm mainly going to be talking about things like how tight we are for space, how you can adjust some ratios, and some things to look out for in terms of synergies and combinations. So a lot of the deck remains pretty similar to what you'd expect. The ride line is inflexible, of course. You need to have the right starter to be able to activate your Vanguard skills, and then these two search your various strategies that you use to play the game. So I haven't actually really updated this deck video. I haven't made a video about this since we've got Richter back in set 13. So I'm going to quickly go over what Richter does. Richter allows you to basically get a third Vanguard attack. You can bind the Avantgarda on your Vanguard circle to rewrite this, and it gains the cards you bound. It gains the skills of the cards you bound. So you can activate the base Avantgarda to suck an order into Soul to draw a card, go back into this, and then do it again to get the restand, and then separately to that, at the end of its battle, it rides back down into the one that you bound. So it enables you to constantly get multiple re-rides and get 3 Vanguard attacks on the Persona Ride turn. This is actually really high amount of pressure. You get 4 drives in total, which matches a lot of other decks in the format right now. You've got the stacking crits, stacking triggers. Obviously, when you rewrite on the second Vanguard restand, you don't get to keep triggers on the Power Vanguard, but there are lines you can take to mitigate that power drop as well, which I'll show you in a moment. The other part of making the deck work is your strategy orders. So part of the main full combo of the deck is when you Persona Road, you'll use this Avantgarda to suck in the Grey 2 Blitz. So the Grey 2 strategy to turn off Blitz orders and intercepts is a turn-wide effect. So even when you rewrite this Avantgarda, your opponent still won't be able to use Blitz orders or intercept. And then when you rewrite this one, you can then suck in Death Winds to give the front row that extra 10k power buff that you really want. Generally, a lot of the times, because of you're no longer playing Habitable Zone, and you don't have the ability to constantly set multiple strategies in one turn, unless you really think you're going for it, you generally won't be sucking anything on the base Avantgarda if you know you're going to be going into Richter. I'll explain how that works in a moment, once you talk about lines of play. We've also got one Gradal. You do need the Chalice because obviously Avantgarda works when you Persona Ride, so you need to enable consistent Persona Rides. I'm then going to talk about some of the generics, the flex slots. So it really does hurt that we're not playing 4 copies of Panspermia. I really want to, because that card is obviously insane. You get to draw when riding, you get to draw when guarding, but space is really tight, and you could argue that you could just cut the Safeherds altogether for the 4th Panspermia and one more copy of something else, but Safeherd just has so much raw innate synergy with the rest of the deck. It basically counts as your 5th Panspermia when you're discarding for ride, and it also synergizes with base Avantgarda's discard 1 for restand, and the new Richter's discard 2 for re-ride. So there's a lot of synergy there. Let me put these to the side for a moment. because obviously the main card we're talking about when it comes to set 4 is Sabine Merc. Her second effect is basically another effect of Ala D'Argente, so she's basically a 20k base because she gains 5k whenever your Vanguard attacks. So it's another beat stick. But the main reason she's there is from the first effect, which is that when she's placed or discarded by your Vanguard's ability, you can Energy Blast 3 to retrieve a strategy from drop. Now, getting strategies in drop is a little bit difficult. The only real Soul Blast you have in the deck is through Ala D'Argente. And because she only really works when you discard it for Vanguard effect, that's why I haven't been putting Capital Zones in the deck as much. As the reusing of play 2 strategies a turn is really, really good. This deck now has so many ways of finding your strategy orders from Ala D'Argente and from drawing so much that you don't need to search for orders, and you have no real way of recurring them either, because again, you don't have space for Secondal, there's no other way of returning orders to the bottom of the deck, you don't have space for Valtrossa, which is really annoying, so you don't have enough Soul Blast to be able to reliably get the orders from drop outside of Soul Blasting them with Ala D'Argente in the first place. But the main thing is that she is another way of offsetting the discard cost of both Avantgarda effects, and then when combined with Seyfried, you can actually add her back to, so with Richter, you can discard these two, Energy Blast 6, this gets removed, Merkable goes back to hand, and she then gets to add an order back to your hand as well. So these two combined effectively make Richter's restand cost 3. Sure, you're only adding 5k worth of shield, but it is still cards you're adding, which is really relevant. And that's part of what lets you not have to aggressively use base Avantgardas on the Richter turn, because you're already reclaiming that cost, you don't need the extra draw effects. But yeah, these two will be your main beat sticks. They'll be 20k base on their own, 30k with Persona Ride, 40k with Death Winds, plus triggers, plus boost. So having more access to these is really, really good. The boosters, so Canada Halfway is probably one of the best cards ever released in the deck. It gives you reliable counter charge, and then Asagi Milestone lets you convert your extra counter blast into extra pluses. Something you can actually do really aggressively is you can discard Richters to ride, knowing that you have Asagis to get them back when you need them. Because you definitely don't need Richter until turn 4. It's very, very rare that you go into Richter on turn 3. So you can afford to discard even Persona Rides as well in the early game, just to enable consistency so you can keep shield in hand, and then drop the Asagi, who will be a 13k booster, to get back your Persona Rides and keep going. I want to quickly talk about Hand and a Halfway here, because an interaction with Richter that, again, I didn't cover when Richter first came out, because I didn't make a video for it, is that you lose the 10k power from Death Winds, and you lose any trigger effects. But with Richter behind Vanguard, what you can do is, I'll quickly set these up just to prove the point. So this is in the bind. You've got Hand Halfway behind the Vanguard. You'll swing with Richter unboosted, who will be 28 minimum, 33 if you use Death Winds. He'll then restand, attack again, 28 again, 38 if you use Death Winds. And again, you will choose not to boost, but any triggers you get here, if you don't want to put triggers onto the rear guards and you want to power up the Vanguard column, crit can go to the Vanguard, whatever, but the power can go to the halfway, so that when you then rewrite into this, Richter rewriting to base Avantgarda gives you 10k, so you'll be 33k with Persona Ride, and 10, so 13 plus 10 from Rewrite plus 10 from Persona makes you 33k base here, which is lower than the 38k you would be with Richter's Death Winds. But then with the boost from Hand and Halfway, that becomes 43. So throughout the entire turn, as long as you keep the Hand and Halfway boost, provided you don't need the counter charge, your Vanguard column will always be incrementing in terms of power, which is obviously where you want it to be. Of course, if you need the counter charge immediately on the first swing, then sure, you'll be forced to use Hanada. Your first Vanguard column will be your biggest one, which is a little bit sad, but it just, you have that flexibility if you don't need the counter charge. So the rest of the deck is pretty straightforward. You've got your perfect guards, and you've got your triggers. We are running 8 crit, 3 draw. The last time I made this video, we were running fronts because you need power, but now, considering how much faster the standard format has gotten, considering how much more quickly decks will scale power levels, the shield from the front is nice, but I think at this point, the game's reached the point where you need the draw triggers to find your PGs to survive high pressure swings like Varga, like Elphobra, like Levidras. So, as useful as fronts are, the raw utility you get from draws is just way too high for finding things like defensive pieces, finding your combo engine. Like, to really realistically combo off every turn, you need to have an order, a way to retrieve the order, one of these two, and ideally a Richter, if not Persona Ride. So there's a lot that the deck is asking of you now, whereas before, you had space to run Freiheit to search Persona Ride, you had space to run Habitable Zone to search your orders, you had space for Enlightened Age or Wrecked Ver to find other orders as well. Now, because so much is dedicated to the Avantgarda package between Richter and Sabine, the only flex slots you have will be for like the highest impact generics, being your Panspermias and your Safeguards. If you really want to play the 4th Panspermia, I can see arguments like trimming down the grade 1 lineup, but I think that's really rough because your grade 1s are your only boosters. Because you don't have Habitable Zone to fetch Dock anymore, you then can't boost with these 20k bodies, which is quite unfortunate because you have 8 of them. So as much as I would love to find space for Habitable Zones and Dock, you just don't have the space. There are also other cards worth thinking about as well, like again, Enlightened Age Dragon is probably one of my favourite cards in the deck, because it's a reliable Soul Blast access that draws you a card effectively and recycles your orders for free, and lets you then, it's also a 15k body in case you need it. But the reason I cut it was because it's a grade 2, we already have our beat sticks, and it doesn't boost without Dot, and the reliability of the Soul Blast just wasn't worthwhile. Another option to consider was Secondal, because again, reliable Soul Blast, recycles your orders so that you can search them with Ala d'Argente, but it is an issue of space. Like, sure, you could play 4 Panspermia and 1 Secondal, and Secondal is also a reliable booster, but the problem is that you're not going to be able to be putting orders or Richters in the drop zone fast enough to be able to get Secondals to Soul Blast 3. And that's, I think, the main thing holding this deck back, is that you're generating loads and loads of Soul, because you're Persona Riding, you're re-riding with Richter, you're shoving these into Soul, and the only real Soul Blast you have is Ala d'Argente, who's only a Soul Blast 1. Like, if this deck had some form of, I don't know, Soul Blast 2, top 7 for any card with Avantgarda in its name, and if you whiff, draw a card, that would, I think, fix everything. That, like, we would cut Asagi Milestone in a heartbeat for that. We'd probably cut Safeguard for that as well, because by Soul Blast, having reliable Soul Blast from turn 3 onwards, you can put cards in your drop zone, like Avantgardas to recycle with Asagi, like Orders to recycle with Sabine, and the entire deck would just become way more streamlined. Like, trimming down Ala d'Argentes would help massively. Even being able to, like, trim down one of these orders, freeing up that 1 slot would be massive. The only reason I haven't trimmed this down to 2 right now is because you need to see this on turn 2 to be able to reliably get the turn 3 combo, if you want to be able to have, say, both on turn 4, because there's no way of searching Death Winds unless you play Ala d'Argente on turn 3, but the moment you can then reliably recycle orders, you can then trim this down to 1, because it doesn't matter if it goes into damage, because you'll always have Kill Shroud, which you can then recycle with your order recycles. And that's, again, part of what I think this deck needs to have that more reliably greased engine, if that makes sense. But at the end of the day, you're playing 8 crit because you're still trying to focus on just overwhelming your opponent with your 3 Vanguard attack crit pressure. Everything else, like this, is just to make that consistent, and then these are part of winning that game. And I think one of the things to note about this deck is that, despite the fact that these are both still late game, like these are part of your combo pieces, like a lot of the more stronger decks in Standard right now, what enables this deck to still survive, I think, is that you can freely commit cards like Hanada halfway in the early game, cards like Asagi and Milestone. Like, you'll always want to put Hanada halfway behind your Vanguard column, but if you have, say, these 3 cards on turn 1, there's nothing wrong with discarding Avantgarda, a Persona Ride, to ride up to grade 2, and then call the Asagi in the front row to add it back, and then Asagi is still a 13k body, which can hit your opponent's Vanguard if you're even if you're going second grade into grade 2, and that still gives you enough early game pressure. Same thing with Sabine. Like, if you discarded an order to ride up, Sabine's Energy Blast 3 when placed doesn't need you to be grade 3. All of your ride line has blue Death Star in the card name. So Sabine can still be a 10k body that adds an order that gives you a slight +1 that lets you aggro with. Which means that you can then save things like Seyfert and Panspermia for later on when you really need them. Yeah, again, it's weak to Lavadras because obviously the -10k means that you don't do anything and they pressure you harder. Varga will obviously wipe your board, and because you don't have space for Valtrossa, there's no way of getting your pieces back. So, and then against Leonorn, like, you're roughly the same game as Leonorn. Leonorn is just faster than you and draws more cards than you, which is obviously difficult. So I definitely don't think this deck is anywhere near good, but it is still by far my favorite deck. There are still lines of play where you're like, okay, I need to search this first, and then draw a card, and then re-ride, and then, like, you know, etc, etc. Like, you know, leaving hand and a half until last, so that you've compressed your deck, so that you're more likely to draw the piece that you need. There are optimizations like that just make this deck really fun to me, and what I love about it. And obviously, it's also a freestanding robot, it's great. And I just wish we had a few more slots. Like, I wish the support pieces we had enabled me to be like, okay, maybe I don't need 4 Ala D'Argente, maybe I only need 3. Maybe I don't need 3 hand and a half, maybe only 2, etc. Unfortunately, I don't think this will ever change because the card has Persona Ride printed on the text, but maybe worlds where we can drop down to 2 Richter, etc. Things like that I think would make the deck go a really long way. But for now, we've only got like 1 or 2 slots of flex space, and I think this is the best we can do with those slots. You know, the 3-2 lineup of the Energy Cyclers is not ideal, but it's enough. And between, you know, the cards that you can never cut, we've only got like, you know, 13, 15 cards to work with. So this is, I think, the best build for the deck going into the set 4 meta. There's not really anything you can do to tech the specific matchups because, again, every slot is just in such high demand for your core game plan. You don't have the room to, like, oh, I'm going to tech this for that, I'm going to tech this for that. No. Everything has to be dedicated to your Restanding Vanguard game plan, and you just have to hope that that crit pressure eventually works and overwhelms them. A lot of the games I win with this deck are through my opponent letting my turn 3 ride up connect, so I get a free restand, and that gives me a little bit of extra damage. Or just from my opponent not having PGs, and I just check enough crits that the multiple Vanguard attack gets there. That is obviously not a reliable game plan, especially not in the current standard format. But if you like the aesthetic of the deck, and you like how the deck plays, then I think you should definitely give it a try. So that has been it for this deck profile. I'm really glad I could finally sit down and show you high rarity Avantgarda. And, you know, once again, thanks to the sponsor of the channel, TCG Matter, for all your sealed and singles needs. But until then, we will see you next time on the channel with hopefully some different sort of content. Until then, take care, bye bye.